Undercover boss orders a simple meal, freezes when waitress says she's surviving on coffee alone. The morning sky was coated in a pale gray, thick like an old blanket wrapped tightly around a city that still hadn't fully awakened. The damp chill slipped through every seam of clothing, curling into empty streets that had long grown accustomed to loneliness whenever the wind picked up. Michael Carter gently tugged his beanie lower and wrapped his worn coat tighter across his shoulders. His figure blended into the crowd of hurried pedestrians on the street. No one noticed that this man was the owner of a well-known restaurant chain, Sunrise Diner, and the small branch in front of him was one of its own. The glass door creaked open with a weary groan. The scent of stale coffee rushed out, not the rich, aromatic kind that wakes the soul, but a faintly burned, bitter smell, the scent of a morning that had already gone wrong. The diner was quiet. Dim yellow light fell across empty tables, casting long, tired shadows on the gray tile floor. In that space, a young woman moved quickly from table to counter. Her frame was slight, her shoulder seams shifted from the rush of service, and her hair was hastily tied back with an old elastic band. Dark circles beneath her eyes revealed nights of poor sleep, her gaze dull and heavy, as though she'd just woken from a sleepless night. Yet every time she approached a customer, she managed to offer a polite smile, thin as morning mist, but just enough to disarm frustration. Michael chose a seat near the window and quietly settled in like any other ordinary customer. But his eyes, seasoned and sharply observant behind thin glasses, never left the waitress for even a moment. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because he could already feel that something was off in this place. A place that was supposed to bring warmth to cold mornings like this. And he wasn't here for breakfast. He was here to see more clearly the truths no financial report could ever show. Michael set down the menu before even reaching the second page. He didn't hesitate, just ordered a plate of eggs and toast and a black coffee. Nothing fancy, just what any regular person might order before heading to work. The young waitress swiftly noted the order. Her motions were practiced, efficient, but there was something in the way she held the pen, a slight tremble, a rushed hesitation that made Michael slow down his observation. That girl was thin. Not the kind of thin from body type, but the kind that comes from malnourishment. Her cheeks were sunken, her complexion pale. Under a light layer of makeup hastily applied, the dark circles under her eyes still showed clearly the proof of sleepless nights. A steaming cup of coffee was placed on his table, accompanied by a polite remark, "Please enjoy this while you wait. Your food will be out shortly." Michael nodded in thanks, but his eyes remained on her. "Have you had breakfast yet?" She paused for a moment, then turned back with a faint smile, the familiar kind, worn by those too tired to keep pretending they're okay. "I live off coffee, sir." Her voice was light, her eyes unblinking, as if she were simply describing a routine. "At least it helps keep me on my feet with an empty stomach." Michael didn't respond. He just watched her, and something heavy stirred in his eyes. It wasn't the words that surprised him. It was the way they were spoken, so casually, so hauntingly soft, as if she had told herself the same thing hundreds of times, until it no longer felt strange. He tightened his hand around the coffee cup. His palm was burning hot, but his chest felt ice cold. At that moment, Michael knew this breakfast wouldn't end with eggs and toast or a cup of coffee. It had just become the beginning of a truth he could no longer afford to ignore. The coffee on Michael's table had gone cold, but he didn't order another. What he needed now wasn't more caffeine, it was more time. Time to watch closely. Emily, the waitress who had just said she lived on coffee, was still moving nonstop. Her every step swept across the diner like a tiny gear in an old machine on the verge of collapse. She brought out food to a customer near the window, wiped down the prep station, then swung back around to organize receipts at the front counter. She did it all without a single word of complaint. Meanwhile, tucked in a dim corner near the storage hallway, two young male employees leaned against the wall, glued to their phones, laughing loudly about last night's soccer match. One of them glanced briefly at Emily, then turned away and muttered, "She just overdoes it, so the manager gives her extra credit." Michael didn't need to hear more. That single remark alone exposed the rot quietly festering in the workplace culture here. He turned his eyes to the back of the counter, where a door hung slightly ajar, a crooked sign reading "Manager Private Office" dangling loosely. Inside, a faint blue light flickered, a vape pen glowing in the dark. The manager never stepped out. No calls made, no floor checks, no commands, no presence. When Michael stood up and headed to the counter to pay, Emily rushed over. "Let me help you, sir," she said quickly, lowering her head and tapping the register. He paid in cash and neatly tucked a tip under the receipt tray without saying a word. But the moment the receipt printed out, he glanced at it and noticed something. There was no line item showing the tip. That wasn't normal. Not at all. Michael pulled out his phone just as Emily turned away to clean another table. He logged into the POS system, using his executive-level admin account, a level of access only the owner would have. Numbers flashed quickly across the screen, but Michael's trained eyes spotted the irregularity instantly. Actual tip amount, system note, auto-hide enabled, patch try Seth, approved. Approved by Marcus D. Branch Manager. Michael froze. Marcus, the man he once held in high regard, who sat through last year's management orientation and vowed absolute transparency before the entire board. And now, it was that very same Marcus who had authorized a POS software update that hid all unregistered cash tips, a perfect loophole to turn small bills into unaccounted income, easily pocketed without oversight. Emily never saw the money customers left behind. And those bills, who were they really feeding? Michael didn't need to ask any further. He stood there, looking at the flimsy receipt in his hand, yet it felt as heavy as an indictment. That girl was living off coffee, while others were thriving off silence and greed. And if coffee was the only thing keeping her upright, then justice, Michael realized, would be the only thing that could keep him from sitting still 1 minute longer. He slipped the receipt carefully into his inner coat pocket, as if it were evidence in a case he was about to prosecute himself. But this case wasn't just about stolen money, it was about honor, trust, and the quiet lives being crushed inside a system he once believed was built on decency. Michael stood up and slowly walked toward the exit. As he passed the drink station, Emily was still scrubbing ceramic cups by hand. Her hands trembled not from the cold, but from sheer exhaustion. The way she carefully wiped the rim of each mug, her eyes focused yet dulled, made Michael pause briefly. He wanted to say something but stayed silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because what needed to be said had to happen somewhere else. Somewhere serious, public, where no one would be allowed to walk away from responsibility. The moment he stepped out of the diner, Michael pulled out his phone and called the head of the IT department. I need all POS system activity logs from Sunrise Branch 14 for the past 3 months. Cash transactions, tip records, approval history, access logs, everything. You have 30 minutes, and Marcus must not know. His voice was firm, not loud, not angry, but charged with pressure. He walked briskly to his car, sat in the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. His phone screen stayed lit on the passenger seat, and lines of data began streaming across it. A simple dashboard appeared. Total tips recorded last month, $0. Total receipts issued, 1,204. Cash transactions, 74%. And then, like the first domino falling, a series of figures broke away from the pattern. Internal notes flagged, hide cash transactions under $10, manually enabled by Marcus D. on the 12th of April. Michael squinted. The 12th of April, the same day the diner saw a spike in traffic following the warm spring promotion. And on that very day, the number of recorded tips instantly dropped back to 0. He tapped open an internal audio logo snippet captured by a security camera near the manager's office. Marcus, chin in hand, vape in mouth, chuckled as he said to another employee, "The whole cash tip thing is easy to dodge. Customers think staff get it, but those kids don't even have access to the system. It's legal, it's clean, no one can sue us." Michael paused the clip there. 1 beat of silence. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in confirmation. It was enough. Enough to ensure no one would be allowed to hide behind the system and laugh at others' kindness. Enough to overturn the so-called by-the-book process that had been shielding exploitation. And most importantly, enough to give Emily, and those like her, a chance to live off their actual labor, not just caffeine and endurance. Michael pressed the button to initiate an emergency regional leadership meeting. Tomorrow, the branch would temporarily close for 1 hour. And in that 1 hour, truth would no longer stay buried beneath the bottom of a coffee cup. The next morning, Sunrise Diner Branch 14 didn't open at the usual time. A sign hung neatly on the glass door, temporarily closed until 9 a.m. Thank you for your understanding. A few early regulars stood outside, puzzled, unsure of what was going on. Inside, the atmosphere of the diner had changed completely. There was no clinking of dishes, no smell of fresh-baked pastries, no cheerful shouting of orders from the kitchen. Instead, a small circle of chairs had been arranged in the center of the dining area, where every staff member from servers to cooks to cashiers was already present. The air was tight, tense, like the still surface of water right before a storm. Marcus, the branch manager, leaned lightly against the counter, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around, wearing a face that strained to stay calm. Mikkel, in a simple shirt, face unreadable, walked in, carrying something no one expected, a small Bluetooth speaker. He set the speaker down on the table. No long preamble. Just a single press of a button. A voice recording played loud and clear in the silence. This whole cash tip game is easy to cheat. Customers think the staff get it, but those kids don't have access to the system. It's legal. It's clean. No one can sue. It was Marcus's voice. Unmistakable. Then followed a series of clipped recordings. Hide all tips under $10. Doesn't matter how much customers leave, those kids won't know. I collected to balance payroll. Fair enough, right? Everyone's struggling. As the final clip played, Marcus straightened from the counter, quickly speaking up. His voice rushed, tinged with anger and desperation. Mr. Carter, I only did what was necessary to balance the budget. I didn't keep anything for myself. It was all for the restaurant, for the team here. Everyone's having a hard time. I was just trying to keep things stable. Michael didn't respond immediately. He turned to look at Emily standing near the sink, hands clutched tightly to her apron, eyes drifting blankly, as if she couldn't believe what was unfolding. Then he looked around the room at every single employee, faces taut with tension, worry, disbelief. Finally, he turned back to Marcus. His voice dropped low but rang with the firmness of steel. You live comfortably. You vape in a private office. You drive a new car. You spend weekends at a lakeside resort. And Emily, he pointed toward the thin girl struggling to stay upright, has to survive on coffee because she can't afford breakfast. She works full shifts and doesn't see a single dollar from the tips customers leave behind. He paused. His eyes were sharp cold as a blade. And that's what you call balancing the budget? The entire diner fell silent. No more excuses. No more sighs. Only one thing now stood at the center of the room, the truth. And it could no longer be denied. Michael stepped slowly toward the center table, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it firmly on the surface. This is the full reimbursement of last month's tips, every single dollar. He turned to Emily, his gaze softening. And starting today, you'll be our acting assistant manager. We need someone decent in that position. Then finally, he turned to Marcus. You're fired, effective immediately, as is anyone who helped enable this. The storm had officially hit. But in the eyes of those standing there, people who had once silently endured, who had survived on coffee and fragile hope for the first time, they saw a real dawn breaking behind the diner doors. A dawn called justice. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Emily was still standing near the sink, but at some point, her thin hands had let go of her apron. A single tear rolled silently down her cheek, soft, as the years she had spent enduring in silence, swallowing exhaustion just to earn a few dollars, which she never even got to touch. Across the circle, Tom, the young employee, who had only joined a few weeks ago, clenched his fists and gave a slight nod to himself. He had once believed that was just how things were. He had believed Marcus when he said, if customers don't tip, that's not the restaurant's fault. But now everything was clear. An older server in the corner murmured quietly, the last time I saw something like this happen was when Mr. Carter used to visit every single branch himself. Michael, still calm and composed, pulled another set of papers from the inside pocket of his coat. They were printouts from the POS system, annotated by hand. He handed them first to Emily. These are the record-specific, detailed showing that all tips were hidden through cash transactions using the patch Marcus approved. You have the right to keep a copy. That's your right as a worker. Emily took the bundle with trembling hands, but this time she trembled out of emotion. No one had ever handed her a document that protected her before. All she'd ever received were instructions, orders, and silence. Michael turned to face the remaining staff, his voice steady. Starting today, our tip-sharing policy will be fully transparent. All tips, whether in cash or by card, will be clearly listed on every receipt and signed off at the end of every shift. He glanced toward the drink station, where a staff member in charge of internal finances opened a laptop and gave a confirming nod. And we're increasing the breakfast stipend for all morning shift staff, so no one ever has to live off just coffee again. The room remained quiet, but this time the silence carried a different warmth. It was the silence of people still trying to believe that something good was actually happening. Marcus stood frozen. He looked around, searching for a sympathetic glance, but met only averted eyes or direct looks of quiet disappointment. Finally, Michael walked toward the entrance, turned back, and spoke his final words. I didn't build Sunrise to become a place where people have to suffer just to survive. I built it so that good people could find fairness every day, starting with a decent breakfast. And too. And then he pushed the door open and stepped outside, leaving behind a room slowly rising from its long-held stillness, first in scattered claps, then stronger, firmer, until the sound filled the room like a thank you that didn't need to be spoken. Once again, the morning light streamed through the foggy glass, shining on faces that had long lived unseen. And this time, it didn't just shine on a dream. It shone on the truth. And from that truth, a new chapter began. 1 week after that fateful meeting, Sunrise Diner Branch 14 opened earlier than usual. The morning light poured through spotless glass windows, no longer dulled by layers of dust from days past. The smell of freshly ground coffee mingled with gentle chatter and soft laughter, creating an atmosphere so rare it felt foreign, even precious, to the people working there. Right at the entrance, Emily walked in no longer the thin girl tucked away by the sink. Today, she wore a light-colored uniform shirt, a neat jacket, and walked with purpose. Pinned proudly to her chest, a brand-new name tag that gleamed, Assistant Manager, Emily Saunders. In her right hand, she held the tiny fingers of her young son. In the other, a steaming paper cup of milk. The boy looked up at her, his eyes bright and wide, like the first gaze after a summer storm, round, clear, and filled with hope. Behind them, his older sister skipped in with a faded pink backpack and a plush donut toy Emily had sewn from an old cloth. Today, both children came with their mother to visit her new workplace. For the first time, as someone who had a voice, a responsibility, and more than anything, the freedom to smile. At his usual seat by the window, Michael sat with a hot coffee in front of him. He raised an eyebrow slightly when the three of them entered, but said nothing. He just smiled and gave a small, silent nod, like a quiet blessing spoken without words. Emily bowed her head in greeting, then turned to help her son adjust his scarf. "Drink it slowly, sweetie. The milk's still hot." The kitchen behind them now glowed brightly. The clattering of pots and pans rang with cheerful rhythm, no longer harsh or rushed like before. Staff were starting to greet one another by first name. A new cook smiled and called out, "Good morning, Assistant Emily." The whole diner burst into laughter. Emily blushed, but she laughed too. A real, genuine laugh. The laugh of someone who finally knew she was no longer just a silent shadow within an invisible machine. At the register, a small wooden sign had been neatly hung. "Tips are yours, 100% always. Tuanbo, mai." Beneath it was Michael Carter's signature. A gentle morning breeze slipped in through the freshly opened door, carrying the warm aroma of toasted bread and the comforting scent of freshly ground coffee. The diner wasn't just lit with electricity, it was lit with warmth. On the wall behind the service counter, a new announcement board had been carefully mounted. Dark stained wood with bold white lettering. Sunrise Diner's commitment, no one gets left behind. Beneath that promise was a list of new policies. Transparent tip sharing by shift. Breakfast stipends for staff working before 8 a.m. Guaranteed, uninterrupted lunch breaks. Internal training program, from server to manager in 6 months. Emily stood in front of that board for a long moment. Her hand gripped her son's hand tightly, while her eyes traced each line of text, as if she were reading a promise that, for the first time, wasn't just empty words, but had finally come true. Behind her, familiar footsteps echoed. It was Tom, the young man who had silently witnessed everything but had never spoken up until now. He stepped forward, placed a box of fresh baked goods on the counter, and smiled brightly. "The mango cinnamon rolls just came out, Emily. I saved a batch for the kids. First day as assistant manager needs something special, right?" Emily laughed a laugh full of sunlight. "Thank you, Tom. But today, they're not just here for breakfast. They came to meet the whole diner. This is the first time they've seen their mom, not just washing dishes or running food." Her little boy shyly looked around the restaurant, then whispered to his mother, "Mom, this place is more fun than I thought. It kind of smells like home." And so, Emily gently squeezed her son's hand, her heart blooming. Perhaps the little boy didn't know that. It was that very smell of coffee, that clatter of pots and pans, and those warm, watchful eyes, they were the scent of a new home. At the far end of the diner, Michael still sat quietly, his eyes following every little moment like a proud father watching his daughter come into her own. He didn't intervene, didn't instruct. He let Emily run things, greeting the team, managing the shift schedule, even selecting which new item to feature on the trial menu. As Emily passed by, he simply said, "Looks like you're already doing better than your predecessor." She bowed slightly, her eyes reflecting a deep, quiet gratitude. "It's not because I'm better, Mr. Carter. It's just the first time someone gave me the chance to truly be myself." Michael smiled, his eyes shining with unmistakable joy. And then, as the front doorbell chimed again to signal the arrival of the day's first customers, the entire energy of the diner subtly shifted. It was no longer a place weighed down by fatigue and quiet suffering. Sunrise Diner had become a place of grounding, a place where, with just a cup of coffee and a warm piece of toast, someone could start over steadily. Sometimes, a simple meal and a hot drink aren't just about filling an empty stomach. They're a gentle whisper to a weary soul that says, "I see you." It isn't about material worth, it's about acknowledgement. It's about the moment someone who's quietly drifting through the world is finally called by name. When a small cup of coffee becomes someone's last anchor to stay upright through the day. And sometimes, in that quiet simplicity, lies the greatest thing of all: kindness, listening, and the chance to begin again as your truest self.